Hey, I'm Adam.
And I'm Brian.
Of Everyone Has a Podcast, and you're listening to Pop Goes Your World.
If you haven't already, subscribe on iTunes. And while you're there, please leave us a rating and review.
And now it's time for our feature presentation.
I'm Chris McBrien, and the pop culture from Generation X is everything to me.
And I'm Derek Myers, and I'm here to educate Chris on the great pop culture of today's generation.
Episode 219, Movie Musicals. Chris McBrien along with Derek Myers, and this is Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations. A few weeks, going here strong, talking about movies from 1980. So this week, doing something a little different. We're going to go back to having a top 5 list. And this week, we're looking at our top 5 movie musicals. So I may or may not break out into song during the show tonight. So just be forewarned on that. But before we get into all that, Derek, any pop culture for you in the past week, my friend?
You bet. I had a few things I had an opportunity to dive into. A couple of them maybe not as deep as I would have liked, but okay. We'll get to that in a second. First, we'll start with a classic. As mentioned before, I have channels in my package, 70s channels, 80s channels, 90s channels.
I like where this is going. Well,
you probably won't. So I have a lot of movies that I've been recording on my PVR, and my wife basically put her foot down and said, start watching all these movies because this PVR is getting full. There's like 50 or 60 movies on there.
Right.
So
that's a pretty full PVR.
Yeah. So I just pulled one that was near the top of the list, and it was the 1990 superhero film Darkman, starring Liam Neeson.
My God. I'm a fan of that movie, by the way.
So I figured last week, we talked about the new Doctor Strange. I talked about the new Doctor Strange movie.
Yes, you had seen it.
And I said I didn't really care for it, but that it was directed by Sam Raimi. Well, this was one of Sam Raimi's first forays into the superhero genre. I mean, I don't know if you call Darkman a superhero, but he's the same. He's along in that vein.
It's a dark kind of one, I guess.
Yeah. So it came out in 1990. Sam Raimi directed it. Is credited with a writing credit on this as well. It stars Liam Neeson in like a very early role. It's got Frances McDormand. Larry Drake, who at the time was winning Emmys left, right, and center for his role on LA Law, big TV show from the 80s.
He was a good bad guy in that movie.
He was a really good bad guy.
There's a scene where he's hopping up and down on his leg, and he's like with a machine gun on it. Like that was pretty good. It's very stylistic.
Yeah. So it was. I watched it this afternoon. Now, I honestly remember seeing this in the theater with one of my buddies, and I would have been 15 when this came out. And I remember enjoying it at the time, and I probably haven't seen it since then. So it was a little bit of nostalgia going on when I was watching it. Some of the special effects work was, I don't want to say groundbreaking because that really implies like that it's excellent, but it was decent for its time. And even now when I was watching it, there was some scenes where you could tell there were some special effects, but given that it came out in 1990 and knowing the tools they had at their disposal, they did a pretty good job. It was a good mixture of practical effects for the Darkman like burn makeup, because the whole premise is the guy gets burned and then he comes back and he basically becomes like a vigilante to get revenge on the people that messed him up. And but no, they use like there's some early computer technology where they use like clearly they're using green screens or blue screens, and they're mixing like they did with Star Wars, where they do like matte paintings and then they use those as the background. Like there was a lot of that kind of thing in it, but it actually looked pretty decent considering how old it is. And I mean the movie wasn't bad. It wasn't amazing. It's not when you compare it to the new Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of superhero stories, it totally doesn't hold up when you compare it to those. But you got to remember, in 1990, there wasn't a lot of other movies like this. Like Batman had come out the year before and was a huge hit. And so that's obviously a big part of how Raimi got the money to make this movie. Well, it's sort of like Darkman. It's like, okay, it's sort of like The Shadow from the Saturday morning serials. And
I think that some people had a real knock on it when it came out because it was like, oh, that's just a Batman ripoff. It's like Darkman, Batman.
Exactly.
Like, come on.
Exactly.
But it was totally different.
But I mean, Liam Neeson has gone on to have a fantastic career. Frances McDormand's won a whole bunch of Oscars. Like, there was some talent in this movie. I mean, they were clearly slumming it a little in this little movie, but it was a fun revisit. Let me put it that way. It was a fun revisit. It's it's not the best movie out there, but it was worth.
I remember it being pretty stylistic too. Like, there's one scene, you know, the little bobbing, I don't know what they call it, but that little bobbing bird, like the bird that goes down, it's like drinking water.
It's drinking the water.
Yes, yeah, from The Simpsons. And
he covered for Homer. He just pressing the Y.
Yeah, that's right. And it was right. It was hitting the keyboard for Homer. Yeah. In Darkman, I remember it was like going down. It was getting closer and closer to hitting the lighter to ignite and to light the gas. It was very stylistic. And that blew up the lad. Yeah, it was pretty cool. Yeah, so that was a good. That was a good one. Yeah. So, and then I got 2 TV shows that I only managed to get a couple episodes in, but I wanted to mention both of them. So, the first one. So I was watching Saturday Night Live this past weekend, and they did a sketch, and it was based off of a Japanese television show that is available on Netflix. And so I thought the sketch was funny, but like anything else with comedy, if you aren't familiar with what they're parodying or what they're making fun of, you're not getting the full joke. And so it inspired me to go back and watch the show. So the show is called Old Enough. And the premise is, I believe it's from Japan, and it's these like 2, 3, 4-year-old children that are sent on an errand by their mom and dad. The episodes are like between 5 and 10 minutes long. So like in the first one, the little boy is given, his mom's like, you got to go to the grocery store and you got to get these 3 things. And she gives him some money and he goes. And it's like, if there's the camera people following the little kid, and you see him like get distracted by a bird, and he's got this little yellow flag that he holds up when he has to cross the street so the cars stop for him. And it's the cutest thing ever. And there's like this lame audio commentary over it, but it makes it funny. And of course the kids are ridiculously young, 2 and 3 and 4 years old. So like the little boy goes to the grocery store and like he can't remember what he's supposed to buy. So it's like, does he buy the wrong thing? And then like he leaves a grocery store and then he forgets, and then he goes back when he remembers what it was. So we watched a few episodes of this called Old Enough. It's on Netflix. The episodes are really short. I would definitely suggest check out a couple episodes, and it's worth a watch. My wife and I have been watching them at night before we go to. It's like, oh well, we got about 15 or 20 minutes before we're gonna fall asleep. Let's just watch a couple of these. Old enough. So on Saturday Night Live though, this past weekend, the sketch they did was, it was hey, now that the show is being real popular on Netflix, they're going to remake it for an American audience. But since Americans don't send 3-year-olds to run errands, we needed to find another group that was equally as helpless and useless. We've gone with the 38-year-old live-in boyfriend. And it was pretty spot on, and it was really funny. So I would say watch the first couple episodes of this Old Enough on Netflix, and then love it or hate it, go online and look for the Saturday Night Live parody of it, and you're going to laugh your butt off. It was pretty good. So cool. That was one of the ones we checked out. And finally, and this is very niche for all of the Canadian listeners, on Amazon Prime, The Kids in the Hall are back. Yes, they are.
And I had a chance to watch the first few episodes, and let me tell you, they were fantastic. I laughed so much. Now, I was not really into Kids in the Hall when they were on TV. Like, they were on the CBC here in Canada, and I was familiar with them, and I knew some sketches, and they were popular when I was at university, so I wasn't in front of a TV as much. But there was a certain group of my friends that we knew certain sketches that we would reference, like any other, like as if it was a Monty Python sketch or a stand-up Eddie Murphy or whatever. And so I was familiar with them, but not really like into them. Then they put out the movie Brain Candy in the mid-90s when I was working at Blockbuster, and that's when I really discovered them. Not that the movie is excellent. I mean, I enjoy the movie, but I know it got panned critically. But that made me go back and sort of become more familiar with who they were. And then I want to say like about 10 years ago, they had a Kids in the Hall sort of mini series. It was called Death Comes to Town. And it was like this serialized story where all of the actors from Kids in the Hall played different roles in an ongoing 10-episode arc, which again was not great, but it had its moments. So I was really, really skeptical about this. And I was so pleasantly surprised. And even if you're not a huge fan of Kids in the Hall, watch the first episode. I think you're going to find it's pretty good. I'm really looking forward to finishing out this series, and I really hope that it does well enough that they get picked up, because their sense of humor has aged nicely as the performers and the creators have aged as well. So
I'm willing to check it out. but I got to tell you, I'm a Canadian. I love comedy. I love sketch comedy. I never liked the Kids in the Hall. I thought their sketches were dumb. I thought it was stupid. I like sketches that have, like, it's very gratifying for an audience when a sketch kind of comes full circle, And yes. I always felt that their sketches just never ended like properly. It was just over. And I was like, what happened? And I just didn't get it. And I know it's easy to look back on the Kids in the Hall and think, oh, like there's things that you really remember that are sort of iconic, like the skull crushing thing and, the chicken lady and all this. But overall, if you go back and actually because their original series is on Amazon Prime, you can watch it. And if you go back and watch, the individual shows, it's not very good. It isn't. Kids in the Hall were not very good, I didn't think. But I mean, hey, if they've aged, and they've come up with some new stuff, I'm willing to give it a try. But I'm one of the few Canadians who likes comedy and likes sketch comedy and doesn't like the Kids in the Hall. I just didn't think they were all that good. I don't know.
Man,
just me.
The next thing you're going to tell me you don't like the Tragically Hip, and we're going to have to take away your Canadian citizenship.
I've already mentioned what I think of the Tragically Hip, and it's got me a lot of hate email, so I don't want to go into that one. Boy. I wanted to just share with you a couple things. So my son and I went up to the trailer for the weekend, and whenever we go, we usually go fishing. We hang out by the fire, and eat hot dogs and s'mores and all that stuff. And we usually bring along a movie to watch, So I brought along a couple of DVDs. So first of all, during the day, my son went to play with one of his friends. So I found I actually had some spare time to myself. So I watched an episode of The Love Boat from season 2 from 1979. Man, it was awesome. Oh, jeez. So I always loved how they had these Z-list celebrities, and the episode I watched featured, had Peter Marshall. Remember, he was the old host of Hollywood Squares. And there was Martha Ray and Ray Bolger. He was the Scarecrow on The Wizard of Oz. And then Lyle Waggoner and Tina Louise. She was Ginger on Gilligan's Island. They were all on. It was great. So I did that. And then the second thing, for the first time, I figured, since it's summer and all, we're coming into summer, that I'd let my son watch Meatballs. So whatever you do, don't tell my wife, because she doesn't think that he's old enough to watch it. So I don't want her to know. Of course, I don't want her to know, so I just go on a 3-time podcast award-nominated show and mention it. Thank God she doesn't listen.
Jeez.
But that's what I did in regard to pop culture this week. So I let my son watch Meatballs for the first time, and he liked it. How can you not like it? Of course. So, I'm such a good dad, and like any good dad.
Here's your dad joke of the week.
Derek, what rock group has 4 guys that can't sing?
Quiet Riot.
Mount Rushmore.
Oh boy, I think I got to be stoned to enjoy that.
I was the only man left on the planet after the Holocaust, eh?
Because you're probably drunk.
That's why I just spent all my time looking for beer.
Save me one of those beers.
No way, eh?
Experience and maturity.
I gotta take a leak so bad I can taste it.
I don't know how they got him to do it.
You drive. There's a lot of cops around.
It was a different time.
No, I've had enough beer.
Some of the things from the early 80s, it's hard to relate to them now.
Oh, come on. That's some funny right there. So, Derek, it feels like it's been a while since we did a top 5 list around here. So this time we're going to be running down our personal top 5 lists of movie musicals. You're a big movie musical guy, right? Like, you like movie musicals, right?
No, quite the opposite. Musicals are not a genre I care for, which is part of the reason that it's taken us 219 episodes before we've gone down this path. Now, I very much like music, and I like to think that I've got a pretty wide taste of musical stylings. Yeah. Probably more than you anyway, I think. Mm-hmm. And but movie musicals has never really been a genre I've cared for. But I think that in and of itself is not necessarily a fair statement, because I think in preparation for this podcast this week, I started to realize there are different kinds of musicals, and there are certainly some kinds that I do enjoy and some kinds that I can't stand. And it's the kinds that I can't stand, I think, are the more traditional ones. And when people start talking about musicals, that's where they're going. And that's why I'm always like, no, I'm not interested. So I wanted to before we sort of get into our list, just talk a little bit about the very large umbrella that is movie musicals.
See, I think that's a good point, because to me, movie musicals, in order to sort of qualify as a quote unquote movie musical, there has to be scenes where people just spontaneously break into song and dance. You know, it can't be that there's a lot of music in the movie, because that doesn't quite qualify. Lots of movies have music in them. If you go back and watch a movie like American Graffiti, you know, Lucas's second film that he did, there's tons of, every single scene in that movie has music in it. There's so much music, but it's not a musical just because there's lots of music in it. And I also don't think it really qualifies if a movie has a lot of live music being played in it necessarily. It needs musical numbers. And that's the whole thing, like with musical theater and things like that. So that's one of the qualifications for me. Does that make sense? Like, you got to break into song. Like, it's things you wouldn't normally do. In a normal movie, people don't walk down the street. In everyday life, people don't walk down the street and all of a sudden decide to break into song. I love a parade or something. They don't do that, you know. But in movie musicals, they do. And so to me, that's a big qualifying thing for movie musicals. Do you believe that's kind of a defining part of the genre?
So that was really the distinction that I wanted to make before we went in the lists is, in my mind, when someone says this movie is a musical, my thought is, just like you said, at some point, a scene will just break into a song and dance number that is completely separate from whatever is happening. And when it's over, the characters just go back to whatever they were doing, and nobody's like, "Hey, how come everyone just started dancing and singing? Where'd all this background kick?"
Exactly.
Yeah, it's and a lot of Disney cartoons are like that, where there's like songs, and because again, the cartoons are trying to appeal to children, and music tends to keep their attention a little more. But that to me is not a genre that I care for, because honestly, it's like I'm not interested in things where the music propels a story like that. For the most part, there are some exceptions, which are the ones on my list. But then there's this sort of other one, like you said, and my wife sort of nailed it when I was talking to her about this earlier, is she said, well, some of the movies you're describing are more dramas that have music in them, or that have musical numbers, or that have performances. So like one of the things we talked about was the recent Queen movie, Bohemian Rhapsody. It's I wouldn't call that a musical. No. I wouldn't call that a musical at all, but almost the entire Queen library is presented through the course of the movie in some way or form. In most cases, it's more like a biopic
of the band. Yeah. And so, of course, they're going to be doing live performances of their music, but that doesn't make it a musical. Have you seen Rocket Man? Have you seen that
I was just going to say. And then like a year later, we have Rocket Man, the Elton John one, where
that's a musical.
Taron Egerton, he actually does all the singing, which to me is a big, important part. Like that was one of the reasons that I would never have called the Queen movie a musical is Rami Malek doesn't do his own singing. And honestly, I'm glad he didn't, because no one can replace Freddie Mercury.
You ain't doing Freddie.
But in the Rocket Man film, there are scenes like we've described where he goes on stage and he performs the songs. But there are also some scenes where the songs are used in a way where it's it's describing what's going on as it's a part of his life, in which it's like you get a sense of how this artist created this song, and the musical component of it in this movie sort of illustrates that a little better. It was it's really, to me, it's sort of those two things. You have the musical, the tradition, we'll call it a traditional musical that has just a song and dance number breaks out, and then you have dramas with music. Like, let me ask you, and again, I don't know what's on your list, so this may be stepping on your toes. Like the movie Fame, for example, which I watched for the very first time a couple of months ago. There is definitely singing and dancing in it, and there are a couple of scenes where the students perform, but I didn't necessarily feel it was sort of that traditional musical thing where it's completely removed. Like, would you consider Fame a musical?
I would. Let's stick a pin in that one and we'll come back to it.
Okay.
How about we do that?
But then what about something like Purple Rain from Prince?
So whereas Purple Rain, not so much, because it's really just his live performances, and then there's sometimes music playing in the background to accentuate the scenes, but there's no moments where they actually break into song or they break into a musical number. And I think having a musical number is different than a band being on stage, like Morris Day and the Time being up there and singing, Jungle Love, or Prince being on stage doing Purple Rain.
Right.
It's more like a biopic of what it was like to break out into the music scene in Minneapolis in the 80s, and there's no scenes in that movie where they just break into song. And so therefore, I don't know if it does qualify. Some people consider Purple Rain to be a musical. I don't know if I do or not, but I did want to mention that musicals have always been kind of important to me because I did a lot of musical theater back when I was younger. The first theater that I ever did professionally was Summer Stock, and we did some locally written musicals that we did at the time, and it was so much fun. Like, I also did a production of Brigadoon. Diane Nyland Proctor was the director. She was the actress from the Canadian TV sitcom The Trouble with Tracy. I mentioned her in our episode about celebrities we've met when we had Greg Martin on the show back on episode 214. So musicals have always held a special place for me. So I'm kind of looking forward to this one. But we did do something a little different when we came into our list, because usually we come into these top 5 shows sort of blind. We don't know what the other guy is going to bring to the table, but this time you kind of reached out to me and you wanted to make sure there was no overlap. And I think it was a good idea on your part too, Bud, because when you kind of sent me your list, we would have had 3 movies overlap. So, I mean, we wouldn't have gotten into as much stuff. So I thought that was good.
Well, and I think, I was going to say, the reason for that is I've only seen a handful of musicals, and the ones I've seen are the ones that people are most likely to say, this was one of the greatest musicals of all time. It's like, okay, well, as a movie guy, I'll give it a chance. And so my list of the musicals that I've actually seen and could even feel are qualified for my list is going to be a very short list. And we'll talk about that through the course of this. I'm sure we're going to get some feedback from people saying things like, well, how did that not make your list? I hadn't seen a lot of these movies. So I'm not saying it's not worthy of being on the list. I'm just saying, if I haven't seen it, I can't judge it.
Nope.
Good, bad, or otherwise.
So before we get into our list, do you have any honorable mentions outside of your top 5? Just quickly, you just want to kind of run down and go through?
Yeah, I've got 2.
Okay.
So
I have 2
first honorable mention. Yeah. So the first honorable mention is the most recent one on my list. Is from last year, 2021. It's called Tick Tick Boom. I believe it's available on Netflix right now. It was directed by Lin-Manuel Miranda, who is famous for Hamilton, and stars Andrew Garfield, who was nominated for an Oscar for his performance. People will probably remember him from being one of the lesser Spider-Mans. Also, he was in the Facebook movie. He's had a pretty decent career. Tick Tick Boom is the story of Jonathan Larson, who is the creator of the musical Rent, which may or may not appear on our lists coming up. And it's basically everything that happened to him before Rent. And so I didn't really know a lot about it, but I watched it and I loved it. I thought it was fantastic, and I recommended it to a lot of people. I'm sure if we go back to the notes when I watched this a few months back, I'm fairly confident I recommended it strongly to the people on this podcast. But because it's so new, I don't know if it's going to have staying power. So I didn't really feel I could put it on a list given because it's got a lot of recency bias. So I just want to give it a shout out as an honorable mention. The other honorable mention, and I'm doing an audible. This was actually going to be on my list as my number 5, but given what we just talked about, I think instead I'm going to throw it on as an honorable mention, is A Star is Born, the recent version with Lady Gaga and Bradley Cooper. So again, it's not really so much a musical as much as it's a drama with music. But there is a pretty substantial musical component to the movie. And again, another one that was nominated for Oscars, and the performances are fantastic. And who knew Bradley Cooper could sing? I mean, Lady Gaga, obviously a singer in her own right,
One hell of a
fantastic
singer, yeah.
performer. Yeah. And, it would have been easy to have a duo where you bring in a professional singer to sort of cover up the fact that the other half of the duo is not that good. But Bradley Cooper, man, he really stepped up to the plate and did his job. So, those are my 2 honorable mentions. What about you, Chris? You got some honorable mentions?
I do. So I mentioned recently that I went to Florida on a trip when I went down there to meet Yancey. And on the Delta flight that I was on, they had an in-flight movie, and I watched it. It was Little Shop of Horrors from 1987. It was really
I thought you were going to say Carrie, the musical. No,
that was the way back, and that had all the nudity in it, and then I got in trouble because I was watching a movie with all this nudity in it, and I had to turn it off. But A Little Shop of Horrors from 1987, directed by Frank Oz. It was so good. Oh my God. And now that's a true musical, breaking into musical number, all these, this production and everything. I thought it was fantastic. So that's one I wanted to mention as an honorable mention. And the other one I wanted to mention was I was the partial owner of a theater company back in like the late 90s, early 2000s. And I remember we all got together, the owners, and we were like, what are we going to do for our next big production? Like we got to come up with something. And I was like, one word. Xanadu. And they made me sell my shares in the company. But Xanadu was like from 1980. And
wait, you didn't tell them the part where you said Xanadu starring Chris McBride in the lead.
Yeah, exactly. That's why playing the part of Olivia Newton-John. Of course.
I was going to say, playing Olivia Newton-John's part.
Yeah, exactly. So, like Olivia Newton-John was in it, and like it was Gene Kelly's, I think, last film role. I remember him in there like playing the flute in it, and like Michael Beck is in it. And it was terrible in a lot of ways because it's like disco and roller skating. Let's put it together. Let's get Olivia Newton-John. She's fresh off of Grease. But there's just something about it. I don't know, like that. Now you are here in Xanadu. I don't know. There's something about that movie I always liked. Those are my two honorable mentions. So let's start with your number 5 and we'll work up to our number 1. You can start us off. Your number 5 movie musical is, take it away.
All right. So I again, not having a very deep bench, I figure I'm just going to do this nice and easy. Sure. I'm going to start with my most recent and work down to the oldest because I feel the oldest one on my list is my number 1 anyway. Okay. And I think a lot of people would argue that musicals sort of reached their peak perfection in that sort of 40, 50, 60s time frame, and that there are not nearly as many modern musical classics. I mean, that's, again, I'm talking on my butt here, and some people may really argue with me, but I would not be surprised if you and I find that a lot of the ones towards the top of our lists are a little bit older. So in any case, so I'm going to start new and work old. So I originally had Star is Born, which I decided to swap out, and instead I'm going to put the movie in that I was going to say as my honorable mention in place of that, and that is the 2007 film Hairspray. This is a remake of a remake. So the original screenplay, or rather the earlier screenplay from 1988 was written and I believe directed by John Waters, but was not a musical.
No, it wasn't.
And so this version was updated to be a musical. For people who maybe aren't as familiar with it, it takes place in the 60s in Baltimore, and there's a TV show where the kids come out after school and they dance on TV, and it's happening as segregation and integration are happening in the U.S. So there's that the racial component, but the story is follows the main character, the main female character. She's a teenager. Tracy Turnblad is the character's name, and she's an overweight teenager, and obviously gets picked on for things like that. But she loves to sing, she loves to dance, and she's, it's a very positive, body positive message. It's a very positive empowerment message where she's just like, I want to do this. I feel I'm a good singer and dancer. I'm just going to go for the audition. And unfortunately doesn't make it originally, but befriends some of the we'll call them alphas. Like the main young kid is played by Zac Efron, who she befriends. And she also befriends the black kids who are there, who are having a hard time of it as well. So they are struggling for different reasons, but they find, they're all having various challenges. And it's this very positive message about overcoming adversity and diversity. And it's got the racial component mixed in, and the songs are fantastic. And one of the big sort of jokes about this movie is that the mother of Tracy is generally played by a man. In this case, it's John Travolta in drag. And I want to say in the original, wasn't it Harvey Fierstein? I think it might have been. I'd have to double check on that.
In the original one.
In the original,
wasn't it Divine?
Yeah, oh, I may be thinking of something else then. Okay.
I think Divine,
that could be
Divine was it.
That makes sense for a John Waters film then. Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. But anyway, Hairspray is one of these ones that when it's on TV, I sit down, I watch it, I enjoy it. The songs are memorable, they're catchy, the sing along. It's got a huge cast. It's from 2007. It's got John Travolta, Queen Latifah, Michelle Pfeiffer, Christopher Walken, Zac Efron, I already mentioned. Allison Janney has a small part in it as well. There's just, it's a who's who. There's all the main cast. You're going to go, oh, either I know who that is, or it's someone who is as recognizable as the names I just said. So that's my number 5 pick is Hairspray from 2007.
Nice. All right, my number 5, I'm going to go with Fame from 1980. So you kind of mentioned this. I remember when this movie came out, like it was this huge sensation. And you mentioned, movie musicals were a thing back in the 50s and 60s, but they kind of died out in the 70s, and then this movie came along and it was based on a chorus line. But once they brought Alan Parker in to direct it, like he kind of took things in like a darker, kind of more serious tone for the movie. And he'd already directed a musical with Bugsy Malone. I don't know if you ever heard of that one. It was all these kids were in it. They played gangsters. Really weird concept. Kind of original, I guess. But he also directed Midnight Express, which was pretty damn dark in its own right. Mm-hmm. But anyway, so I like how this movie, it goes kind of between all the different performing arts. Like there's a great scene early in the movie where it goes between the different teachers and they're all saying how their particular area of study is the most important. It's like, dance is the most important art. No, acting is the most important art. No, singing is the most important art. And all these kids go to this Juilliard type school and they're all super talented. You got to be just to get into it, right? But the thing is, they're all in pursuit of fame. And it's really, the movie is about how elusive that is, even for like these super, super talented people. Boyd Gaines is this amazing actor in the class. Everyone knows he's the guy. He's going to be the greatest actor ever. And he ends up waiting on tables. And Irene Cara is this phenomenal singer. And she ends up doing topless photos, with this sleazeball photographer. So it's gritty, it's real, it hits home. But I think most importantly, it's got great music. And there's the one scene where the kids all break into song and dance together. And that's where it kind of kicks it into the musical for me. The one guy starts playing the keyboard and then they all start kind of joining in.
Oh, like in the cafeteria, yeah.
Yeah, and then it just kind of spreads right across and everyone's like singing and dancing. And so it does qualify as a musical for that reason for me. And then also there's like the title song by Irene Cara. And then when they all sing the Body Electric, it's a different kind of musical, granted. But it came along at a time when movie musicals were, they were transitioning a bit anyway. So I think it hits the mark. So it's number 5 for me.
And so when I was talking about this earlier, you said, let's put it in. So this is one of the movies, though, where I feel that although there was the musical number you just talked about in the cafeteria, to me, that felt very organic and in the moment and a part of the script and something that the characters might actually have done in that kind of an environment. Whereas a more traditional musical number is, the backdrop gets pulled away and 20 dancers come out and it's like, and then when the musical number's over, the lights go back to normal, the backgrounds go back, all the people who are dancing around go back to doing their business, and nobody's like going, hey, what just happened? Whereas the scene you just talked about, I felt that although it's not actually referenced again by the characters, it very well could have been, and it wouldn't have felt out of place.
True.
But again, which is not to say that disqualifies it, but it's an interesting way to work more music into your movie and certainly make it more of a quote musical rather than a drama with musical components. So nice. All right, we're moving on to my pick next.
Yeah, you're number 4. What do you got?
My number 4. South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut from 1999.
A musical where you never thought one was when you first went into it. You just thought it was this animated film and bang.
It was so good. I remember seeing this with my wife, Kay, and I went with our good friend, Greg Martin. We were all working at Blockbuster. We had just recently left. No, I think we were all probably still working there at the time. And when the first songs come out and swears in the songs and the things they're making fun of and parodying, the video looks like the rap videos of the time.
Yep.
I remember when they first started the first song and they broke into it, Greg started laughing so much that he could barely breathe. He literally fell off his chair.
So did
laughing,
Yep.
crying. The tears are coming like he was going. I thought he was dying. Like it was the funniest thing. Now, believe me, I thought that this scene was funny and I was laughing as well. but his laughter was just so infectious that it just made it 10 times more enjoyable.
So I did not see that in the theater with you. But I got to tell you, same experience. When I went to see that movie in the theater, I was laughing so loud, I fell off my chair, and the people around me were laughing at me as much as they were at what was on the screen. Same situation.
Oh, yeah. Yep. And I had just recently, like probably 6 months before this, my wife had got a subscription to one of the local theater performing company things, and it's like, oh, X dollars, you get to see so many plays and musicals this year. And I thought, fine, we'd only recently, I don't even think we were married at the time. We would have just started dating. So it's like, I'm a young guy, I'll go out to these performances with you. So she had brought me to see a live production of Les Miserables, which had been in Toronto at the time, which I had never seen before. And honestly, I didn't really care for it that much, but I can appreciate it. So in this South Park movie, there is a lot of musical references that are directly related to the Les Mis musical. Mm-hmm. And I was so glad that I had that context, because I was able to enjoy the artistry and the parody and what Parker was saying and doing in this movie by being able to pull from that. It was like I was saying before with my Saturday Night Live sketch. It's like, if you know the original source material, you just get so much more out of it. And so yeah, that really helped me for that. I'm sure there are other things that I still don't really know all the references where they're from, but oh my God, this movie is fantastic. I've probably seen it between 15 and 20 times.
Oh, it's so
I bought the CD soundtrack, and I can remember it was one of the soundtracks that I used to leave in the car all the time, and we would play. I remember taking a road trip with one of my fellow Blockbuster buddies one year, and we only had 5 or 6 CDs in the car. This was one of them, and we were just singing along. I mean, it's fun to sing songs with swears that are like funny songs, though, and especially because it's all around these children. This movie, I mean, it's a great movie with a great message that still holds up and is still relevant, and the funny songs with the swears just make it that much better. So South Park, Bigger, Longer, and Uncut from 1999, directed by Trey Parker. This is my number 4 pick.
That's a beauty. Obviously, you were talking about the song Uncle when Greg was losing it. I remember when they started singing that song, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For me, it was just such a surreal experience, because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I couldn't believe what they were saying, but I also couldn't believe how good the song was.
Yes.
That's what got me. I was like, this song is so good. And then he's like, you're an uncle. And he's like, well, why would you call me an uncle? Well, because you your uncle. Oh, right. And I'm like, what am I listening to? This is crazy. And they break into this musical number, and then the way that ends at the very, very end.
I was just going to say,
they hit the button.
Cherry on top.
Yeah, they hit the button like they do on Broadway. They're like, Uncle suck my like, what did they put that in there for? Like, the whole thing was so funny. Oh my God. That's a good one. That was one of the funniest movies I have ever seen in my entire life. That was the most I ever laughed in a movie theater, until it was only ever beaten twice when I went to see another Trey Parker and Matt Stone film. When I went to see Team America: World Police, when there was the sex scene with the puppets, I laughed even louder, and I laughed just as loud during Borat, during the naked wrestling scene. So those were like the 3 funniest things I've ever seen in my entire life. And I'm glad you mentioned Les Mis too, because it's Les Miserables, or as it's also known, translated in English, The Miserables. That's what I've always thought of it anyway. Yes. So no, that's a great one.
Another point I just want to say was, so Trey Parker is, I'm going to say it, he's a musical genius. Mm-hmm. This guy is fantastic. I think
he's amazing.
He has received a lot of accolades, but I think a lot of people just dismiss him because he's that South Park guy, but he is great. And if you have the opportunity to see the Book of Mormon, you should go, because it was fantastic. And if it was a movie, it would have been on my list. But since it's only been performed as a play and has not yet been done in a musical version, like a film, that's the only reason it's not on my list. But it is. You think this movie's good?
Only time I've ever been in a theater to watch live theater, when at the end I literally jumped to my feet for the standing ovation. Like, it was just that good. Like,
yeah, it was
how did these guys do this? And I remember when they did it, watching it, thinking, God, these people that are on Broadway that have been doing this their whole lives must be really pissed. These guys come along, these foul mouthed guys from South Park, and they're like showing them up on how to do musicals right. You're right. Absolute genius when it comes to writing musicals and stuff. Oh God, those guys were good. So, okay, that's your number 4.
What's your number 4? Yeah, what's yours?
I'm going to go back. I'm going to go way back, all the way to 1935. And it is A Night at the Opera from 1935. It's a Marx Brothers movie.
So is that the Marx Brothers?
Yes.
Yeah.
So back in the early 80s when we had the movie channel, Derek, they used to always show, for the most part, they would show like the latest movies at the time. But for whatever reason, they showed a bunch of old Marx Brothers movies on there. And this exposed me to what's been a lifelong love of the Marx Brothers. They remain, in my mind, the greatest comedy team in history. And this was their best movie, A Night at the Opera from 1935. So it's this musical all about the opera, go figure. And now this one's a little different because the actual opera singing that goes on, mostly between Alan Jones and Kitty Carlisle, who played kind of the leads, I think those are some of the weaker moments of the film. But the musical numbers that include the Marxes, oh my God. Harpo plays the piano and he plays the harp, of course. And watching Chico play the piano is just an absolute marvel to watch. And then you've got the comedy scenes in this movie, especially when they crowd basically the whole ship into Groucho's stateroom. And then the scene when Chico and Groucho, they're arguing over the opera singer's contract and they're ripping it up. Oh my God. I think this movie ranks up with as one of the best comedies ever made in the history of film. And the musical numbers just kind of add to the whole experience. If anyone listening, if you have never seen a Marx Brothers movie, do yourself a favor and go watch what these guys could do, because it is absolutely amazing. There's a lot of really, really good Marx Brothers movies, but A Night at the Opera was the first one that they did without Zeppo, which was basically addition by subtraction in my mind. And it was the first one that they did that was like on this grand scale by a movie studio. And it was their best film. And let me tell you, that's saying something, because I mean, all their movies are amazing. So that was mine. Number 4. So what's your number 3?
Nice. Well, I just want to say I've never seen A Night at the Opera. I have seen a couple of Marx Brothers movies, but not that one. But you're right. From time to time, they do appear on the various my cable movie channels. Like I think I recently watched what's the one where the one guy becomes the president of the fictitious country?
Duck Soup.
That one was on maybe 6 months ago. I remember watching that, and I think you had recommended it, and I saw it in the lineup, and I was like,
Rufus T. Firefly.
Yep.
So good.
And so I watched that, and I really enjoyed that one. So no, I'm gonna keep my eye out. When I see that one coming on again, I'm definitely gonna flag it.
So good. So good. All right. Your number 3.
So my number 3, again, I'm going from older to newer, and we're jumping from 1999 with South Park all the way to 1979. We're going with All That Jazz.
Ooh, you mentioned that one not that long ago on the podcast.
I was going to say,
yes,
I've only seen it once.
Roy Scheider's best performance ever.
Roy Scheider was fantastic. So it's the story, it's loosely based on real life director choreographer Bob Fosse. Follows a segment of his life, somewhat loosely, somewhat accurately. And as we said before, though, there are definitely some parts that are just performances within the movie because he's casting and putting together a stage play. But there are a couple of musical numbers, especially at the end where he basically dies. Spoiler, if you haven't seen it, came out in 1979. Come on. Where it's this whole musical number that's like complete fantasy. It's absolutely removed from the story, but it makes perfect sense in the context of the film. And it's got all the things you would expect from a traditional musical. It's got the over-the-top musical numbers. It's got the costumes. It's got the huge cast. I was going to say cast of thousands. I guess it's not probably thousands, but a very large cast of people in some of these very extravagant and remarkably choreographed numbers. And one of the things that I really liked about this, just the opening sequence, where it's literally an open casting call in the 1970s to come out and try out for Broadway. And it's like so many of these things. It's just how do you quantify what it is you're looking for when you've got 200 people in the course of an afternoon trying to audition for something. And I've always found that part of performing remarkable, that how you can have so many people come out for a casting call and what is it that separates one person from the next? Because I've seen some of these things on TV and in movies where you see 7 or 8 performers do the exact same thing, and you're like, they all look great to me, and then someone will go, well, this guy was clearly better. And you, really? How? What did you see that I didn't see? And I think that's what makes a great director is they can pick up on those things. So great performances, great music. A great movie. I believe it won Best Picture, if I remember correctly.
No.
It won 4 Oscars. No, I know Roy Scheider did not win, but it was nominated, right?
Kramer versus Kramer won Best Picture.
Right.
Yeah.
What did it get here? Best art direction, best costume, best film editing, best musical, original score, adaptation. It was nominated, but did not win for Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Director, Best Writing, Best Cinematography. So, I mean, it was nominated across the board. It definitely deserved the accolades it's got, and in retrospect, probably deserved a few more that it didn't get. So, my number 3 pick, although I've only seen it once, I did just see it recently. It's the 1979 classic, All That Jazz.
That's a good one. That one deserves it. So if the first 2 that I've mentioned so far, maybe you could say they don't quite qualify as true movie musicals, my number 3 absolutely does, and that's Grease from 1978.
Yep.
This movie is a lot of fun to watch. So right from the opening animation and the song Grease, which is sung by Frankie Valli, but it was written by Barry Gibb.
I was going to say, it's written by the Gibbs, right? Yeah.
God, those guys are some of the most prolific songwriters of all time, I tell you. But this movie was a huge hit. I mean, it's a Gen X staple. And let me tell you, as a former DJ who did weddings, Gen X women love the songs from this movie. It's mostly Summer Nights. But it's not only the songs and the musical numbers. I think my favorite in the movie is probably Beauty School Dropout. I just love that scene. But there's the cast. You've got, Travolta and Olivia Newton-John. They were just perfect for their roles. And the supporting cast, you got Jeff Conaway from Taxi and Stockard Channing, who's, and by the way,
she seriously, who believes Stockard Channing was a teenager? She was like 35.
Yeah, she was older, but she was in one of my favorite 70s movies of all time, The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh. So
The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh.
Oh, nice. God, I love that one. The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh. Whoa, whoa.
Whoa, whoa, whoa.
That one wasn't a musical, but I mean, it was so good. But I mean, this one also, the Sid Caesar was in this. Remember Dodie Goodman? Fannie Flagg from The Match Game was in it. And I want to give a special shout out to Dinah Manoff. I always had a crush on Dinah Manoff. And then Shauna Nas in the movie. Remember they play at the dance? They had their own TV show right around the same time this movie came out. There's a lot.
And then the guy Bowser
Yes.
from Shauna Na, he went on to be on like every game show.
Yes, he was.
And
on
the guy is
Game
incredibly
and
intelligent.
Yes,
Yeah, he did very
and he
well.
was
When
like,
you saw him, you knew that guy was going to win.
He was like supposed to be like the tough guy of Shauna Na, and he's like got the skinniest like arms, like, and he's like, so I'm the tough guy, and he used to do this thing where he'd flex his arm, but there's no muscle there, which is so bad. But like I say, like this movie was really good. And it's a lot of fun to watch. So it was a huge hit. It was the highest grossing movie of 1978. I mean, it beat out Animal House. It beat out Close Encounters. It even outgrossed Superman. So for all those reasons, it's my number 3. So on to your number 2, my friend.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Grease, honestly. I've seen it a couple of times. I'm familiar with all the music. Not a big fan. The only song I actually like is that opening theme song where you've got the animation going. That one I really enjoy, but this movie just never clicked for me like it did for a lot of my peers. I don't know why. I just never cared for it.
I thought it was good. True music.
All right. So we're going continuing to go back. So All That Jazz was 79. We're going to go to 1975.
Ooh.
The Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Oh, man.
I was not familiar with this at all until I went to university. A friend of mine had the video and said, my room was one of the only rooms in our dorm that had a TV and that had a VCR, let alone just the TV. I had the TV and the VCR, which made me very popular. And what would happen is people would show up and they're like, hey, if I bring a movie, can we do movie night in your room? I'm like, sure. That way I didn't have to rent anything. And people always brought snacks and beverages, and it was always a good time. And someone showed up with Rocky Horror not long into the semester. And even though I'm not a big fan of musicals, I thought, I'll give it a try. And I loved it. I fell in love with it right away. I've seen it a bunch of times. I actually watched it not too long ago. I think we talked about it on the podcast a little bit the last time I watched it. I definitely feel the third act of the movie really falls to pieces. The first two acts are definitely the strongest parts of it. But the songs are just so good. Tim Curry as Dr. Frankenfurter is fantastic. Loaf's in this movie and does a great job. You've got Susan Sarandon. Again, I'm not a big fan of her voice, but she does a decent job. And the songs are just so memorable.
Barry Bostwick.
Time Warp.
Barry Bostwick.
Yeah.
That's so good.
And I mean, the song "The Time Warp" is like, I hear that at almost every wedding I go to, and I can remember when I was in school going to clubs, and the Time Warp inevitably managed to get played. I probably heard it once or twice a month in the clubs. It would show, especially if we were going to like an '80s theme club or like a retro style club. It was a fan favorite, and I love the over the top theatrics and the costumes. The fact that, you know, when it came out, you've got Tim Curry in full drag. He's got the song, the Sweet Transvestite, which I think is arguably my favorite song from this movie. And yeah, it's just, there's so much to like about it. Like I said, I watched it again recently after having not seen it in a long time. And I was like, oh, is it going to hold up? And I thought it was just as good this time as it was the first time. I love it. It's my number 2 on my list, Rocky Horror.
And the thing was, I think if you just watch this on VHS or watch it on DVD, you're missing out on the real full experience. Because you need to go to a screening. And so when I went to university, I went to a midnight screening of this. And it was unbelievable. They throw the toast and the squirt bottles of water and all that stuff. Oh my God. It's just that you got to be part of that experience. People dress up. Like, it was just such a cult, film. Like, it was just something else. I mentioned before, I did a lot of theater when I was younger. One role that one thing I always wanted to do was the Rocky Horror Picture Show. I never had the chance to do it. Always wanted to do it. Didn't want to play Frankenfurter. I couldn't imagine me parading around in that. Although
I would love to.
I was much thinner back then. But
we watched this the last time. My wife and I watched it, and she said, she goes, "You should go as Frankenfurter for Halloween one year," because I used to be a little heavier, and I lost some weight over the last year. And she's like, "Now you've slimmed down a bit, you can pull that off." I was like, "Yeah, I think I probably could."
I always wanted to do a theatrical production of this and play Brad. I always wanted to do it, that nerdy role. I just would have loved it. I thought it was great. One of my favorite songs in it is the opening song with "Damn It, Janet." It's just so, like, it's just this nerdy, terrible thing, I don't know, the whole thing. Love it. Love it all. Great pick. So, good one. Okay, my number 2 I'm going to go with is The Blues Brothers from 1980.
I figured this was going to make your list, yeah.
Maybe, maybe surprising.
Is it traditional musical? This is, to me, sort of a drama with music.
No, I'm going to argue that it is. It is. And, you might be shocked it's not my number 1 musical, but I could not ignore the number 1, which we'll get to in a bit. But, so my number 2 movie musical of all time, John Landis's 1980 SNL spinoff, The Blues Brothers. Now, again, you mentioned, is it a true quote unquote musical? It is. It totally is. It is in my books anyway. So again,
I guess the diner scene definitely makes a qualify.
I define a movie musical as a movie that has musical numbers in it. And it just can't be lots of music, right? You have to have characters breaking into song and dance. And now the musical numbers exist in this movie, obviously. The Blues Brothers play at the Palace Hotel Ballroom. There's John Lee Hooker singing on the south side of Chicago. The James Brown scene when he's like the Reverend Cleophas James, the Triple Rock. Oh, yeah,
right.
Don't forget that.
Yeah.
So you could still maybe think that one is just even still a bit of a kind of just a live performance.
Yeah.
But, and the other one too is the scene at Ray's Music Exchange when the whole neighborhood breaks into dance,
Yeah.
There's that. Yeah. And then especially, like you mentioned, the scene with Aretha Franklin at the Soul Food Cafe on Maxwell Street.
Oh, yeah. Everyone brought their A game to that.
It's a movie musical, and then you add to it all the over-the-top car crashes. There's like the driving through the shopping mall, Carrie Fisher with all those weapons, and John Candy as the cop, Frank Oz as the corrections officer. And then you've got there's performances. They're in the country and western bar, and they do the Joliet prison at the end of the movie. There is a lot going on in this movie, and I love it all. I love all of it. And I would argue that the backup band was one of the best set of musicians ever assembled, ever. Matt Guitar Murphy, Tom's Bones Malone, there's Willie Two Big Hall, Blue Lou Marini, Mr. Fabulous. That was a bad backing band. And John Landis, was really on his A game at the time. And to me, he kind of created this subgenre of what I always called epic comedies. Like they were like bigger than life. And like, I don't know. It'd be close for me between this and Animal House as to which is the better overall movie. I might lean toward Animal House a bit on that. But as far as movie musicals go, man, this one has got everything going for it. So number 2 on my list, The Blues Brothers from 1980.
Nice. That's a good pick. So my number 1, this is my all-time favorite movie musical.
Okay.
I would argue it's one of my all-time favorite movies as well. It's definitely the musical I have seen the most, with maybe the exception of South Park, but they're probably pretty close together on that one. And it is the 1952 classic, Singing in the Rain.
Nice. Yancey loves that movie too.
This movie's so good. I mean,
it's fantastic.
It's got part of what I love about it is just the songs are so good. The songs are so memorable. Obviously you have the song from the title, Singing in the Rain. Mm-hmm. You've got the great scene where Donald O'Connor does Make 'Em Laugh, where he's singing and dancing and he jumps over the wall and the furniture and all. It's fantastic. You've got the very memorable Good morning, where the three of them are singing. Even the little sort of funny, more limerick spoken word one, Moses, where he's like, Moses supposes. And
when I told you when I did that summer stock, one of the plays that I did had a musical number that was based on that. And it was based on Moses Supposes. It's up. I've got it up on YouTube. I'll have to send you the link afterward. And it's me in that scene. So yeah, it was. Great number.
I mean. So this definitely, it has the musical numbers. It is a movie about making movies, about making musical movies, which again, you could argue is a little bit of a cheat when it comes to, why is it a musical? Well, it's the movie within the movie kind of thing. But it definitely has these breakaway scenes. And it's got Gene Kelly doing his song and dance number. Like, who doesn't love that? And it's got a lot of really good, memorable parts. It's a good movie even without the music. And that I find with a lot of the more traditional musicals, they have all these songs and then it's like, okay, let's put a story around these songs. Because really this movie is just a showcase for the music. And I think that's part of why I don't like a lot of traditional musicals is I'm more interested in the story. And when the songs, it's just this part of the story leads you to the next song. And then this part of the story leads you to the next song. But the story itself doesn't really seem as cohesive. Whereas this one, the story is very cohesive. It makes perfect sense. It's interesting. It's funny. It's entertaining. There's a lot of lines from this that are quoted in my house. So part of at the beginning of the movie, they go from silent pictures to the talkies where you could actually have sound in the movies. And you find out that the most famous female silent movie star has this really nasally, annoying voice that the producers immediately realize if people hear what she really sounds like, this is going to kill probably her career and their movie. And so there's a lot of funny parts at her expense where there's either where she's mispronouncing words or when they try and sync up the video with the audio. Like there's the one scene where she's saying, yes, 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 no, 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 but they're not quite in sync. So when she's saying yes, she's shaking her head no. And when she's saying no, she's nodding her head yes, which is really funny. And then there's when she's got her vocal coach there and he's like, I can't stand him. I can't stand him. And so, again, my wife and I just from time to time will go off. I can't stand him. It makes us laugh, even when we try and repeat it. But no, the songs are so good. Singing in the Rain, just the song itself is so good. There's so many things to like about this movie. There's so many songs to like about this movie. This, arguably, if you pulled 100 people on the street right now, why are they out at this time of night? But if you polled 100 people and then said, what is your all-time favorite movie musical? I would bet you more than half of them are going to say Singing in the Rain. And I would definitely be in that half. Singing in the Rain, absolutely my number one pick.
Nice. And Gene Kelly was more of a dance guy. Like he didn't have the greatest vocal talent, but he had this ability when he sang to just infuse joy into his inflection and into his words. Like that's a great pick. Great pick. Love it. And of course, he went on to do Xanadu. So there's that too. Okay.
Oh, of course.
My number one. When I was a kid, we used to go up to my grandparents' cottage for a lot of the summer. And they had a video disc player. And it was one of the ones where you slid in the plastic sleeve, and the movie was inside. We've talked about this before, Derek.
Yep.
And I mentioned it. So the thing was, they had this video disc player, but they didn't have a lot of video discs. And you couldn't really get them anywhere. But they did have The Wizard of Oz. And let me tell you, as a kid, I watched this movie a lot at the cottage. It is not only the best movie musical ever made, it is one of the best all-around films ever made. I would argue that this is an absolutely perfect film. The way it opens up in black and white and then shifts to color when Dorothy goes to Oz. The characters are perfectly cast. I mean, I know Buddy Ebsen was originally cast to play the Tin Man, but he had to drop out because he was allergic to the metallic silver paint they used on his skin. So Jack Haley took over and did just fine, and you got Ray Bolger, who of course went on to be on The Love Boat. He couldn't do much else because, none of them could because they were so perfect in this movie. You couldn't imagine them playing any other characters, right? And I like how it's like this family movie, but for little kids, it's pretty scary, actually. I remember my cousin, when we were kids at the cottage, he was absolutely terrified of the flying monkeys the witch had.
Yeah.
But the songs were so good. They'd get Somewhere Over the Rainbow, probably maybe the single most famous movie song in the history of filmmaking. And then the thing is, all of the characters sing their motivations. You've got, If I Only Had a Brain, or If I Were King of the Forest. Like, such a good movie. And all the roles that Frank Morgan played in that movie. What was he, like 5 different parts? He was like Professor Marvel and a gatekeeper and a guard. He was the wizard himself. So, and then the moral of the story, there's no place like home. Even if it's just black and white Kansas, like the message is very universal. It's very powerful. And it just kind of ties together this perfect movie. It's timeless. My grandparents loved it. My parents loved it. I loved it. My kids love it. It's perfect. It's a perfect movie and is the best musical ever made in my mind. So that's my number one.
Yeah, it's hard to find somebody who, number one, has not seen The Wizard of Oz, and number two, does not like The Wizard of Oz. And I mean, there's it's a sliding scale of how much you like it versus love it. I'd probably somewhere right in the middle. I definitely like it. I certainly wouldn't put myself 10 out of 10 love it. There's, like you said, so much to like about this movie. But like you were mentioning, when I first saw it when I was younger, there were parts of this that terrified me. So it was not something I was eager to rewatch, but I do recall watching it for the first couple of times on TV when it came on TV with my parents, because my mother really enjoyed this one as well. Mm-hmm. And I remember she would sit with us and watch it. And so it was fun sort of to be introduced to this movie from my parents, which so few of the movies that I enjoy now, were like that. Even as a young kid, although my parents would bring me to the movies, it was rare that they were able to say, well, this is something that I saw when I was younger and that you may enjoy now that you are of a certain age. So, no, this is a good pick. Your list is a solid list, man. This is a good one.
Yeah, well, I thought we did pretty good. All right. So on that note, what do you say that we have some
fun with Caveman?
So sticking with our subject of movie musicals, Derek, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to list the titles of songs, and you have to guess the movie musicals that the songs appear in.
Holy cow.
That's easy, right?
Okay. Well, I mean, hopefully they're the same name as the movie they appear in.
Nah, man, this is easy. But here's the twist. Okay, are you ready? You have to do this while sitting in the winner's circle of the $100,000 pyramid. All right, so you got to strap yourself in. I'm going to be giving you clues. There's 6 movies to get up the pyramid. The only clues I can give you are the songs that are in the movie. So I list the songs, and then you just have to name the movie musical. Are you ready?
Oh boy, I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be.
Oh, you're going to do great, okay? Go. Circle of Life. Hakuna Matata.
Lion King.
Yes. The Bird. Jungle Love. I Would Die for You.
Oh, the Prince one. Purple Rain.
Yes. Your Song. I'm Still Standing. Tiny Dancer.
What's Elton John? Was it Rocket Man?
Yes. Okay. My Favorite Things. Climb Every Mountain. Do Re Mi. Maria.
Oh, that's that.
Edelweiss.
That's it.
The Sound of Music.
I've never seen this one.
The Sound of Music.
Isn't that the name? It's Sound of Music.
Yay! Very good. Chim Chim Cheree. A Spoonful of Sugar.
Oh, Mary Poppins.
Yes. Very good. Somewhere That's Green. Suddenly Seymour. Supper Time. Feed Me. Skid Row. Dentist. Mean Green Mother from Outer Space.
Little Shop of Horrors.
Seymour, feed me!
Little Shop of Horrors.
Yes!
When you said dentist, I was like, oh, that's what clicked it for me. I've never seen The Sound of Music, so I didn't know it until you literally said the song called The Sound of Music.
Well, but there's a song in it called The Sound of Music, so it was.
Which I didn't know until just now.
Well, now you know.
There was, or I never.
The hills are alive with the sound of music. Never heard that?
Sure.
Okay. Well,
vaguely familiar.
All right. Well,
anyway.
You did really well. So you get to win a very, very special prize this week. Do you know what the special prize is? Are you ready
Uncle
for
Fonzie.
it? What? No. You are going to be taking home a DVD of Xanadu. Congratulations. Well done. All right. So we've spent the last couple of shows doing, movies from 1980. And concentrating on that. And then we did a top 5 list, obviously, this week. So we are the pop culture podcast for the generation. So it's time for us now to take a look at a bit of a newer film. It had to take place after 1989, so it's like a millennial film. So that is completely 100% out of my element. So this is where you get to pick the movie, Derek. So what do you have in mind for us? What newer film do you want me to watch and come back and review with you next week?
Well, it almost seems like the opposite of what we just did. So we did musicals, which are always like singing and dancing and upbeat and joy and happy. We're going to go the opposite way. We're going to go to long, slow, boring, quiet.
Okay.
We're going to do the 2007 film that many people argue is their all-time favorite movie. And I think a lot of people would say it's probably one of their all-time favorite movies of the last 20 years. And that is the Paul Thomas Anderson classic, There Will Be Blood, starring Daniel Day-Lewis.
Very interesting.
Now, it is long. It's 2 hours and 38 minutes. And I want to say, for the first 15 minutes, there's no dialogue whatsoever. It's just the cinematic, it's all about oil and digging for oil and prospecting for oil. And it's a visual spectacle. Arguably it's a masterpiece of cinema, and we can talk about that next week. I've only seen it a couple of times, but I did see it within the last year, and I was pleasantly surprised about how much I really thought it held up, and I really enjoyed it. I don't know if you've seen it or not. Why don't you save that till next week? You get a chance to rewatch it. We'll come back. We'll talk about it.
So you know the way things work around here. I don't watch anything after 1989, and now you expect me to go and watch a 2.5 hour movie that is slow and boring? Yeah, this ought to be fun. Okay, I think we all know where this is heading.
Yeah, I was actually kind of shocked that we're watching this before Boogie Nights if we're going to do a Paul Thomas Anderson movie, but no, this I think this is a good one. It's a little change of pace from last week. I think a lot of our listeners are probably familiar with this film. I think many of them, if have seen at least parts of it, if not all of it. Right. So I'm kind of curious to get your take on it. We'll come back next week. We'll dive in and we'll go from there.
I don't know how much I'm looking forward to doing it, but I will absolutely watch the movie, and I'll come back and I'll review it with you. And I tell you what, until then, this is Chris McBrien on behalf of myself and Derek Myers saying thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World, the pop culture podcast for the generations.
Thanks for listening to Pop Goes Your World. You can contact Chris and Derek at popgoesyourworld.com. Please take a minute and review the podcast on iTunes or wherever you download and listen to the show.